Imagine paying $100,000 for a piece of paper, only to find your job description includes, must be able to lift 30 pounds and smile at customers. That's the reality for thousands of graduates in 2025. And it's not just a feeling. Recent research shows about 52% of the class of 2023 were underemployed within a year of graduation, while U.S. student debt has grown to nearly $1.8 trillion, reshaping how young adults make decisions about homes, families, and even retirement. If college was supposed to guarantee stability, why are so many with debt losing out to candidates who skipped it altogether? This video will break down how higher education changed into the system we see today, what's really driving the job market in 2025, including AI and shifting employer preferences, and the practical alternatives people are turning to instead. The model that once reliably moved families up the ladder is now failing a large share of graduates, and understanding why starts with how the institution itself transformed. How college became a business, not a pathway. To understand how we arrived at this point, we need to look at how higher education gradually shifted from a public service to a profit-driven model. What once operated as a pathway into stable opportunity now functions more like a business, with students positioned less as learners and more as paying customers. Instead of prioritizing research breakthroughs or classroom teaching, universities increasingly focus on branding, revenue streams, and debt-backed enrollment. Research shows a large share of teaching is now performed by contingent or part-time faculty, while administrative staffing has ballooned, redirecting resources away from direct instruction and into corporate-style management. This shift didn't happen overnight. For much of the 20th century, many public universities still emphasized affordability and civic purpose. But as state funding steadily declined in the late 20th century, institutions began filling the gap through higher tuition, added fees, and aggressive recruitment. Out-of-state students and international applicants were treated as financial engines, paying premiums that offset budget shortfalls. Families were promised upward mobility, but what they often encountered was a financial framework dependent on their willingness to take on long-term debt. Tuition inflation over the past several decades shows how dramatically the financial equation has changed. Sticker prices have risen far faster than wages, fueling an imbalance where the cost of a degree keeps climbing but entry-level salaries remain flat. The result? Borrowers now leave school carrying balances that average around $38,000 each, while U.S. student debt as a whole exceeds $1.7 trillion. For households already managing rent, transportation, and daily living costs, student loan payments add a substantial, often suffocating, layer to monthly expenses. The rhetoric frames this borrowing as an investment in the future, but repayment timelines often stretch across much of early and middle adulthood. Instead of tackling systemic affordability, many universities invested in amenities designed to attract applicants. Recreation centers with rock walls, luxury-style dorms, and themed dining halls became central selling points. Meanwhile, faculty positions shifted to short-term contracts, and library or instructional budgets stagnated. The contrast is striking. Campuses promote resort-like experiences while academic quality relies on underpaid adjuncts. This imbalance doesn't meaningfully improve graduates' outcomes, but it does incentivize institutions to market lifestyle perks as differentiators in an increasingly competitive recruitment race. Behind this facade lies an uncomfortable truth. The financial engine of modern higher education does not depend on producing job-ready graduates. It depends on tuition checks clearing and federal loans arriving on time. Once loans are disbursed, schools receive their share immediately, leaving borrowers with repayment obligations that can last decades. Because these debts are nearly impossible to discharge, even through bankruptcy, graduates bear most of the long-term risk while universities move on to enroll the next class. Garnished wages, seized refunds, and compounding interest make it clear that repayment is not just a cost, but often a lifelong commitment. For years, the promise of this system rested on the idea that the gamble would pay off. Higher lifetime earnings would outweigh the burden. But by 2025, too many graduates find themselves working in jobs unrelated to their field of study, earning wages that don't align with the debt they're carrying. The mismatch between expectation and reality is stark. Students were told the degree was a ticket into stability, but many discover instead that it feels like financing for an uncertain product, one that may never deliver what was implied. Administrative growth sharpens this divide. Universities now employ more staff for compliance, development, and branding efforts than for teaching, with top administrators receiving compensation packages comparable to executives in the private sector. Metrics used to evaluate success often emphasize enrollment growth, fundraising totals, and expansion projects. By contrast, student job placement or long-term economic stability rarely factor into performance incentives. The system rewards volume, how many students can be recruited and retained, not the long-term well-being of those who graduate. Student lending cements this structure in place. Unlike most industries where dissatisfied customers can walk away, borrowers are locked into financial commitments that bind them for decades. Even when the education proves inadequate for building a sustainable career, repayment obligations remain enforceable. Institutions profit up front, while students deal with the downstream effects as monthly bills collide with rising living costs. What was framed as a bridge to independence becomes, for many, a financial tether that slows any real progress. By 2025, nearly every aspect of higher education reflects this corporate orientation. Marketing materials resemble real estate brochures, featuring tree-lined walkways and gleaming new facilities. Surveys measure student satisfaction with food service or Wi-Fi reliability more than with faculty mentorship or career readiness. Athletics often overshadow academics, with stadiums and branding campaigns drawing funds and attention away from classrooms. On paper, universities promote pride of community and promise-rich futures. But behind the glossy images sits the reality of stagnant job outcomes and ballooning repayment schedules. The shock for many graduates is twofold. First comes the number on their balance sheets, a total that will follow them regardless of career path. Then comes the recognition that the institution itself was not designed to partner in their success, but rather to secure their financial commitment. Universities hold the leverage, setting prices and shaping necessity narratives that lure students into signing agreements with long-term consequences. Students often enter with little understanding of how debt will intersect with flat wages, or how long repayment will last. This makes one paradox especially clear. Higher education continues to brand itself as a springboard for ambition, yet its operating system relies less on knowledge transfer than on dependable debt repayment. The diploma signals not only academic completion, but also contractual obligation. For many, that obligation behaves more like a subscription plan than an investment. Payments recur month after month, regardless of whether the product, career stability, ever materializes. And this financial setup creates the context for the next problem. Because if the cost and debt load are rising, the natural assumption is that the outcome justifies the sacrifice. But when graduates step into the workforce, they quickly discover another layer of disappointment waiting for them. The job market's harsh reality. Graduates approach the labor market expecting that a degree will open the right doors. By 2025, however, the reality looks far more complicated. Burning Glass and Strata found roughly 52% of the class of 2023 were in jobs a year after graduation that did not typically require a bachelor's degree. Even more troubling, research from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis shows underemployment often persists. Graduates who begin in non-degree jobs are far more likely to remain underemployed years later. For individuals who invested years of study and tens of thousands of dollars, this represents not just a rough start, but the possibility of a stalled career trajectory. This dynamic is easy to see in the everyday workplace. Many graduates frame their diplomas and take pride in achieving them, yet quickly discover job boards filled with positions unrelated to their studies. A communication major might find work as a receptionist, while a biology graduate stocks shelves at a retail chain. Degrees in fields like criminal justice or performing arts show particularly high underemployment rates, with many graduates ending up in hourly wage work. By contrast, majors such as nursing or computer science have much lower rates, with employers more likely to align graduates with jobs directly tied to their training. The gap reveals how field of study matters enormously, undermining the notion that a degree alone secures opportunity. Employers, meanwhile, express skepticism toward recent graduates. Surveys consistently show hiring managers tend to favor candidates with proven experience over those fresh out of school. Reports from NACE and Inside Higher Ed highlight that many managers see graduates lacking the practical, applied skills needed to contribute immediately. What might once have been learned on the job is now treated, as an entry requirement. As a result, interviews often stall when applicants can discuss theories from courses, but struggle to illustrate how those lessons translate into results. The hesitation isn't always about academic knowledge. It's about whether companies want to invest resources into training someone who has never run a project, used a tool, or met a client outside of a classroom simulation. The hiring market amplifies this pressure further through credential inflation. Positions that once provided training now list degrees as basic prerequisites for routine tasks. A front desk role at a hotel might request a 4-year degree in hospitality management, but pay only slightly above minimum wage. Retail advertisements often tack on college degree preferred for work that involves scanning inventory or ringing up customers. In some warehouses, job descriptions now ask for a bachelor's, even when the duties are packaging and shipping. This disconnect between the formality of the requirements and the modesty of the pay fuels widespread frustration. Many graduates realize that the education system built them up to believe the degree ensured a professional track, only to find that in practice, it functions as a blunt screening tool rather than a guarantee of meaningful employment. The relative oversupply of credentials only sharpens this problem. For decades, the bachelor's degree carried both symbolic value and practical weight, understood by employers as evidence of readiness. But with record numbers of students now graduating each year, the credential no longer distinguishes one applicant from another. Instead, it often serves as the minimum bar for jobs that would have historically hired high school graduates and provided on-the-job training. The degree's meaning is diluted. It does little to prove skill or ensure higher pay, and in many cases functions less as evidence of preparation and more as a sorting mechanism to cut down applicant pools. Some industries reveal these shifts more drastically. In technology, bootcamp graduates and self-taught coders often outpace traditional computer science students by presenting tangible portfolios or active repositories of their work. Employers, faced with choosing between a resume filled with classes and one filled with functioning projects, increasingly lean toward demonstrated proof of ability. In education, new graduates may find openings frozen or eliminated, forcing many into unrelated roles just to cover bills. Even in healthcare, where nursing is often seen as a safe bet, regional shortages and competition can still make placements uncertain. These examples illustrate that the tension lies not only between expectation and outcome, but between the entire promise of stability through education and the current employment structures that reward speed, practicality, and affordability of training. Graduates internalize these mismatches in highly personal ways. After hearing throughout adolescence that success depends on higher education, finding themselves in low-paid or part-time work erodes confidence and identity. Parents who once trusted that the diploma signaled a step into the middle class now watch their children juggling several jobs despite holding formal qualifications. The broader economic picture has shifted so meaningfully that traditional advice, study hard, earn your degree, and step into a career, feels at odds with the lived experience of an entire generation. At the same time, hiring data offers an important insight. Candidates who combine their degrees with targeted, skill-based training consistently outperform those who rely on the bachelor's credential alone. Certifications in software tools, apprenticeships, and micro-credentials in areas like analytics or digital marketing provide applicants with direct, measurable qualifications that employers can act on. For example, a graduate who supplements a communications degree with a short social media management certification quickly proves more competitive than peers who stopped with general coursework. This illustrates a fundamental shift in what the labor market actually values: immediacy of contribution, adaptability, and demonstrable outcomes. The larger lesson is unmistakable. By 2025, the degree is no longer the guaranteed gateway to mobility it was once believed to be. It competes with newer, faster, and often cheaper signals of value. Employers reward proof of skill and evidence of adaptability rather than educational prestige by itself. For graduates, the irony is sharp. Years of enrollment and tens of thousands in costs buy them an entry on a resume that is increasingly treated as ordinary noise. And while underemployment captures immediate attention, it only tells part of the story. The weight of loans taken on to earn these jobs, or more accurately, to end up underemployed in spite of them, becomes the long shadow that shapes what comes next. Because when paychecks feel light and degrees feel underused, the financial Obligations attached to that education continue, month after month, shaping decisions about housing, families, and futures. The debt trap that shapes life choices. The steepest weight comes not from underemployment itself, but from what shadows it: the accumulation of student debt. For millions of graduates, the story does not end with struggling to secure meaningful work. It continues in the form of payments that shape nearly every choice of adulthood. What was promoted as a manageable investment becomes instead a debt cycle that follows people through their most formative years, dictating when or whether they can buy a home, start families, or envision retirement. As of recent reports, over 40 million Americans hold federal student loans, with outstanding balances totaling between $1.70 and $1.83 trillion. The average individual balance sits in the high $30,000s, and for younger borrowers, the monthly strain is especially visible. Surveys show Gen Z graduates often face median payments around $526 each month, a figure that competes directly with rent, food, and health expenses. Those numbers frame the experience not just as a personal financial inconvenience, but as a structural barrier baked into adult life from the very start. Understandably, this burden shifts major milestones further away. Empower's survey found that about 45% of borrowers report delaying essential decisions, such as buying a home or starting a family, because of loan repayment. Decisions often framed as personal timelines are frequently no more than arithmetic. Monthly obligations eat up so much budget space that saving for down payments or planning childcare costs becomes impossible. Many report delaying homeownership or family formation, not as a matter of preference, but because loans limit saving. The data shows this is common, not rare. Living arrangements highlight how repayment reshapes everyday reality. Some graduates move back in with family to stretch a paycheck far enough to cover obligations. Others share housing into their late 20s or 30s, not out of lifestyle preference, but because pooling rent is the only way to manage both housing and repayment simultaneously. For those who live independently, entire paychecks often feel pre-committed, where money cycles out almost as soon as salaries hit bank accounts. Survival feels achievable, but building wealth, the very thing higher education was supposed to enable, remains out of reach. Part of the frustration comes from the way debt repayment stretches across decades. Unlike a mortgage, which builds ownership in exchange for the long grind of monthly payments, student debt creates no parallel asset. Borrowers can celebrate years of payments without gaining a house, equity, or investment to show for it. Instead, they stare at balances that reduce only slowly, often more slowly than expected, because interest accumulates in the background. The loans function less like an investment in a person's future and more like an ongoing bill that consumes their present. Graduates express this experience through humor, even if tinged with exhaustion. Internet jokes about celebrating anniversaries with loan servicers circulate widely. Memes emphasize the absurdity of 10 or 20 years of steady payments still leaving borrowers in debt. As exaggerated as the humor appears, the fact it resonates so strongly reflects a real psychological fatigue. Student loan payments are some of the longest-lasting financial commitments a person may hold. People joke because laughter feels easier than acknowledging decades of obligation. Cultural comparisons with older generations sharpen this perspective. Parents or grandparents often describe their own education as once affordable enough to cover through summer jobs or manageable part-time work. For them, debt was temporary and often negligible. By contrast, today's students inherit loans eclipsing the scale of what their elders would consider tolerable. Conversations between generations often reflect confusion or judgment, as if the delay of milestones results from personal mismanagement instead of systemic cost inflation. Borrowers are then trapped not only in financial pressure, but also in cycles of misunderstanding and criticism within their own families. For all the talk of repayment options, relief measures often prove more cosmetic than solution. Loan forgiveness programs are limited, highly conditional, or difficult to qualify for. Deferment or income-driven repayment plans may reduce short-term stress, but extend repayment over decades, compounding interest along the way. This creates what feels less like a path toward eventual financial independence and more like a treadmill. Payments go out steadily, balances persist, and the endpoint rarely appears closer. Borrowers may achieve technical compliance, but independence remains elusive. The ripple effects reach private life as well. Many couples delay marriages or avoid merging finances outright, concerned that a partner's loan obligations will drag down shared credit scores or risk joint stability. Surveys routinely identify borrowing as a reason young adults postpone having children, reasoning that the costs of diapers, childcare, and healthcare would break already precarious budgets. Home loans are another flashpoint, as lenders scrutinize debt-to-income ratios that many graduates simply cannot meet. The outcome is predictable. Borrowers continue renting long after they expected to own, settling into cycles where rising rents only deepen the sense of being boxed out. Retirement savings also wither under the pressure. In the absence of widespread pensions, personal saving has become the primary tool for financial security later in life. Yet for graduates locked into repayment schedules, contributions into retirement accounts are postponed in favor of meeting today's minimum due. Compounding, which ideally grows savings over decades, instead compounds debt burdens that eat into disposable income. By their 30s or 40s, many have barely established retirement accounts, ensuring heavier dependence on prolonged work and later life earnings to cover old age. Even the way loans are designed reveals their permanence. Payments arrive with the regularity of subscriptions, predictable, automatic, and inescapable. Unlike streaming services, however, there is no option to cancel when the utility diminishes. For some, the metaphor isn't about media, but about contracts they signed in their teens or early 20s, often before fully grasping the implications. These obligations remain constant through job changes, moving cities, or even divorces. The one enduring relationship, it seems, is with the lender. By 2025, the picture is clear. Student debt is not a brief bridge into opportunity. It functions as a structural weight that reshapes adulthood itself. Life plans are adjusted downward, milestones are deferred, and aspirations often wait indefinitely behind the line item marked loan repayment. If higher education was supposed to represent independence, the reality is closer to long-term tethering, where the cost of entry into the system multiplies into recurring obligations that set limits on nearly every personal and professional choice. The irony becomes sharper when considering the landscape of work itself. For many graduates, it is not just debt that limits their path forward, but also the evolving nature of employment. Even as they make sacrifices to keep up with payments, new competitive pressures emerge, not only from peers without degrees, but from tools and systems that change how jobs are won in the first place. AI is reshaping the rules. Artificial intelligence is adding another layer of complexity for today's graduates. For decades, a bachelor's degree was marketed as protection against automation, promising roles that machines couldn't easily displace. Yet by 2025, AI is no longer confined to repetitive factory tasks. It has begun creeping into jobs once described as white-collar safe. Multiple high-quality studies note that generative AI is reshaping early career and entry-level work, though researchers caution that the scope and long-term effects are still being studied. Early signals, however, are clear. A joint study by Stanford and ADP found that employment losses were disproportionately concentrated among younger workers in occupations most exposed to AI. At the same time, research from the Atlanta Fed shows that employer demand for AI-related skills in job postings rose sharply through 2024, particularly in roles tied to data, finance, and technical services. Together, that evidence points to an emerging economy where both opportunity and risk are concentrated in ways past generations never faced. This shift is visible in the kinds of tasks AI can now perform. Accounting graduates quickly discover that software tools handle bookkeeping with accuracy and limited human oversight. Journalism students face AI models that generate basic articles and summaries in seconds. Paralegals see algorithms reviewing contracts and sifting case law in timeframes no human can match. Even in healthcare, AI systems scan medical images and flag anomalies before physicians ever evaluate them, leaving new trainees focused on oversight rather than discovery. These are not hypothetical scenarios. They reflect real adjustments in workflows. Importantly, researchers stress that in many sectors AI is augmenting work, not eliminating entire professions. But for workers newly entering these fields, the fact that AI now completes critical slices of their responsibilities creates pressure to prove distinct value from day one. Graduates once assumed their years of coursework guaranteed security. Universities cultivated the message that complex professional fields would remain safe from encroaching technology. but evidence suggests otherwise. AI has begun to automate many tasks that once justified a degree, and employers are adjusting hiring expectations accordingly. Some roles that graduates believed were their entry points are now performed as efficiently by AI-assisted workers at lower cost. To the extent that automation replaces human work, it does so unevenly. Research from the Atlanta Fed notes that automation is concentrated in particular tasks and occupations, leaving others largely untouched. Degrees still retain value in many fields. Nursing, engineering, and certain technical sciences continue to demonstrate strong returns. But for a growing set of roles, employers now prioritize demonstrated adaptability or AI compatibility over a formal diploma. That recalibration is playing out in hiring practices. Rather than viewing degrees as default proof of readiness, managers emphasize direct skill evidence, familiarity with analytics software, ability to design AI prompts, or experience managing workflow alongside machine outputs. A candidate who completed a 6-month certification in data visualization or natural language processing may prove more attractive than an applicant whose credentials are spread across abstract theory. NACE surveys back this shift. Employers consistently rank practical experience and specific technical skills above academic prestige in hiring decisions. It doesn't eliminate the value of a degree altogether, but it does downgrade its signaling power in areas where AI productivity is most visible. Ironically, this situation allows non-traditional training programs to outpace traditional universities. Bootcamps focused on software engineering or data science equip students with portfolios of functional projects, live applications, code repositories, or client-ready prototypes. By graduation, they can answer an employer's central question: can you do this today? With tangible proof. Many four-year computer science graduates, by contrast, complete capstone projects that still trail behind industry tools already in circulation. The delay is partly structural. Curriculum updates move through bureaucratic processes that cannot match the rapid pace of technological change. A programming language might shift in popularity before a committee has even finalized revisions to introductory courses. This lag undermines the conviction that higher education insulates workers from disruption. Universities counter that their greatest contribution lies in broad competencies: critical thinking, problem-solving, and communication that cannot be mechanized. Yet here two boundaries are blurring. Natural language models draft emails, summarize complex reports, and generate campaign proposals that often equal or surpass first attempts. By new graduates, employers openly question whether the refinement brought by a new hire justifies a salary premium when inexpensive AI tools achieve comparable tasks instantly. The gap may not be universal, but it undercuts the argument that soft skills acquired in lecture halls remain unchallenged territory. This mismatch feeds growing frustration among students and families. Marketing campaigns promised future-proof skills and preparation for jobs that don't yet exist. Instead, many see the jobs disappearing before they fully materialize. An economics major may spend semesters analyzing trade flows, only to graduate into an environment where risk evaluation is largely generated by AI models. Marketing students once expected to design end-to-end campaigns. Today, brand teams rely on platforms that generate graphics, test ad copy, and model consumer behavior algorithmically. The sense of being misled is reinforced by employment metrics. Fields like nursing or engineering still demonstrate clear pathways, while disciplines like journalism, criminal justice, and general business often show elevated underemployment and weaker wage outcomes. Findings echoed in data from the New York Fed and St. Louis Federal. In response, many students supplement their degrees with tightly targeted training. Portable certifications in cloud platforms, project management, or applied AI sharpen their resumes and provide demonstrable evidence of current skills. These shorter programs take the uncertainty of university lag times out of the equation. Instead of waiting years for curricula to adapt, workers adjust on their own, leapfrogging into industry-relevant competencies. Recruiters notice when a resume includes current in-demand credentials. They often weigh those signals more heavily than whether the graduate's university appears high in national rankings. Examples across industries reinforce the same lesson. In healthcare, graduates who quickly learn AI diagnostic systems distinguish themselves from peers who rely only on clinical theory. In law, young associates focus on negotiation and interpersonal strategy, the few areas automation cannot yet touch. In marketing, entry hires interpret data from AI campaign tools rather than generating each draft from scratch. The unifying trend is clear. Success depends on adaptability, constant reskilling, and willingness to work alongside ever-evolving technology. Students who cling to the assumption that their degree alone offers protection face the highest risks of redundancy. Universities find themselves in a defensive position. Their model was built on providing stability and long-term security in exchange for extended study. Yet the labor market now rewards agility, the ability to pivot, learn new systems, and integrate skills before competitors do. That inversion leaves some four-year graduates overshadowed by candidates whose shorter pathways better aligned with today's technology-driven roles. As the Stanford/ADP research suggested, it is younger, less established workers who disproportionately feel the impact when firms substitute or restructure early career tasks under AI pressure. Still, the ongoing diffusion of technology means outcomes vary. The Atlanta Fed and EIG both caution that how quickly firms adopt AI and in what tasks they apply it will determine the true scale of disruption. At the simplest level, AI has accelerated the clock. The prestige once associated with years of study wanes as industries change faster than degrees can adapt. Certifications, portfolios, and demonstrable flexibility now outperform the slow assurances universities continue to offer. Survival in the workforce is determined less by accumulated course credits and more by how quickly professionals climb the learning curve of new tools. For graduates, the harsh realization of 2025 is that the rules have changed. Stability no longer belongs to the most traditionally credentialed. It belongs to those who treat skill building as continuous, often independent work. And while this pressure reshapes the landscape of skills themselves, it also interacts with a broader hiring environment that is becoming less forgiving. Employers aren't only asking whether applicants know today's tools. Increasingly, they're rewriting the very definition of entry-level work itself. The disappearance of entry-level jobs. How can a role be called entry-level when the job posting demands 3 years of prior experience? By 2025, the phrase rings hollow. For many graduates, the role that was meant to represent their first real step into the workforce instead functions like a locked door. Listings routinely ask for a resume stacked with internships, industry-specific projects, or software credentials that most young applicants never had the opportunity to build. What should be an introduction to work now resembles a mid-career checkpoint, leaving new graduates unable to even get their footing. Researchers have tracked this shift for years. Academic studies on degree inflation highlight how positions historically open to workers without degrees, such as production supervisors, now often require not only bachelor's degrees but multiple years of experience. What was once a genuine first rung on the ladder has been raised several steps off the ground. Burning Glass and Harvard Business School studies illustrated how roles across manufacturing, logistics, and office administration began demanding higher credentials not because duties changed dramatically, but because employers sought pre-vetted candidates rather than invest in formal training. The result has been a steady narrowing of opportunities where inexperienced applicants might once have entered. Behind this change lies a structural reallocation of responsibility. Several decades ago, large firms maintained internal pipelines for development. Apprenticeships, extended junior roles, and rotational programs served as training grounds. But those programs cost time and money, and during waves of budget pressures and quarterly scrutiny, many organizations simply cut them. Companies increasingly spend more resources on recruiting than training, ensuring they hire ready-made talent while externalizing the cost of skill building onto universities and individuals. Even federal investment in workforce training has declined over the years, leaving students and their families to shoulder the upfront expense through loans. The employer's stance has become simple: arrive competent or don't arrive at all. By 2025, that stance is visible everywhere in job advertisements. Junior analysts are now asked to arrive proficient in data dashboards and bring years of direct project experience. Marketing assistants are expected to show entire portfolios of measurable outcomes. Even administrative assistants face requirements for prior project management skills or fluency in enterprise software. An entry posting effectively filters out anyone whose only experience is classwork. In practice, the entry point has shifted to a level far above the heads of most graduates, leaving them caught between overeducation on paper and underqualification in practice. The effect trickles into hourly positions as well. Companies looking to distinguish themselves by branding workplaces as professional environments sometimes add degree preferences to service sector roles. Restaurant chains have posted listings asking supervisors of baristas to bring bachelor's qualifications. Retail assistant manager roles now require business degrees, even when the tasks involve scheduling and overseeing sales staff. At best, the degree acts as a sorting mechanism. At worst, it tells indebted graduates that they need credentials to apply for jobs that pay little more than subsistence wages. The closed circle effect is one of the harshest outcomes. Graduates are asked for experience before they can step into work, but they need that initial job to build the experience in the first place. A select few can fill the gap with unpaid internships or extended contract work, but these paths come with their own inequities. Not everyone can afford to take unpaid months in expensive cities just to pad their resume. Those who can accept unpaid opportunities enjoy cumulative advantages when full roles finally open. Those who cannot are repeatedly overlooked, often falling behind permanently. This cycle feels especially bitter for students who completed every step expected of them. They sat through lectures, finished assignments, and paid tuition, often through debt. Once in the job market, they're told that what they've earned only checks one of several boxes. Companies demand the other boxes be filled by years of prior involvement in the field, something coursework cannot provide. Students quickly develop the sense of being credential-rich but experience-poor, with universities collecting their fees but the labor market declaring them unfinished. Concrete examples make the contradiction clear. A junior social media coordinator job, ostensibly designed for new graduates, now specifies years managing brand accounts, fluency in multiple analytics platforms, and certifications that must be purchased separately. Supply chain associate postings, once geared toward teaching recruits on-site, now demand prior licensing in logistics software systems. These requirements become barriers that students cannot overcome independently, since many of the tools require employer-linked accounts or costly subscriptions. No amount of independent determination can fully substitute for being allowed inside the system. This contradiction is further underlined by company rhetoric. Employers publicly emphasize their commitment to fresh talent and diversity of perspectives, often featuring young professionals in glossy recruitment materials. Yet portals reveal requirement lists designed to screen those very applicants out. The contradiction between video, testimonials of eager new employees, and the unseen filters of prerequisites is one most graduates spot quickly. It produces frustration but also mistrust, a sense that companies want the appearance of inclusion while maintaining closed filters in practice. The human toll shows up in repeated rejection letters citing lack of years in the field. Many graduates apply despite not meeting posted criteria, hoping for leniency, only to be automatically dropped by applicant tracking systems. Others eventually adjust expectations downward, applying for jobs outside their area of study just to scrape together income. The term entry-level becomes something of a dark joke. Forums filled with graduates rename it already proven level, a phrase that captures their sense of futility. The long-term outcome is a form of disillusionment. If graduates cannot find even baseline roles tied to their studies, they stop believing the traditional career ladder exists for them at all. Rather than pursue advanced degrees or trust companies to recognize their training, increasing numbers look outward toward building their own trajectories. Freelance work, short-term projects, gig labor, and earned certifications fill the vacuum. For many, these paths seem more accessible and more honest than chasing listings that expect them to already be halfway up the ladder before setting foot on it. The broader picture reveals a clear chain of causality. Higher education expanded supply, funneling record numbers of degree holders into the job market. At the same time, corporations cut their training programs and reshaped job definitions to require applicants who already had experience. Postings began treating degrees as minimal filters while embedding expectations of prior results. That combination collapsed the number of available true entry points. The outcome is a generation entering adulthood trying to navigate a workforce with ladders that no longer start at the ground, only midway up. This shift reshapes ambition itself. What was once a standard path, graduate, secure an entry-level role, grow into a career, no longer feels realistic. Graduates recalibrate, valuing side hustles, contract projects, and online portfolio building more than loyalty to a single firm. Ironically, companies that sought to reduce costs may be pushing away exactly the young workers who could have fueled long-term growth. By shutting doors at the beginning, firms risk cultivating a workforce that stops knocking altogether. And that leaves graduates searching for other routes to survive financially. When conventional first jobs vanish, educated workers turn toward alternatives that offer immediacy, if not security. What they find often isn't what they were promised in college brochures, but it does provide an income when corporate pathways fail them. The gig economy versus the college dream. Why are so many students who completed university now spending their days delivering food, driving ride-hailing cars, or piecing together freelance work online? This reality captures one of the biggest contradictions in today's labor market: the struggle of educated workers to convert their credentials into stable roles. Journalistic reporting and national surveys regularly document graduates taking on gig or service jobs while searching for openings related to their degrees. For some, this path is not the adventurous side option it is often portrayed to be, but rather the most immediate answer to covering bills in a job environment that demands experience before granting entry. The link between debt and these stopgap choices is central. College loans were framed as an investment in strong future earnings, but repayment demands arrive regardless of whether a graduate has found meaningful employment. Research highlights the strain. More than half of borrowers report their loans limit their ability to save or invest for the future, with Gen Z facing especially heavy monthly payments. Against that backdrop, the gig economy offers something traditional roles increasingly withhold: cash flow without waiting months to be hired. For graduates trying to avoid missing payments, driving a few hours for a rideshare app or accepting online freelance contracts often feels less like an option and more like a financial necessity. The expansion of gig platforms over the past decade amplified this fallback pathway. As companies reduced full-time hiring or substituted contractors for entry positions, digital apps quickly stepped in. Delivery services, ride-sharing, and freelance platforms scaled to meet demand while quietly absorbing a wave of educated workers denied paths into industries they studied for. Seeing a political science graduate making food deliveries or an English major ghostwriting short-term content projects is no longer unusual. It is routine. These aren't summer jobs done for pocket money, but structured survival strategies tied to student loan repayment schedules and rising living costs. The appeal of gig work lies partly in its flexibility. Delivery drivers or freelancers can control when they log in, pick up projects, or step away. They can toggle between multiple apps to maximize earnings during busy windows. For borrowers juggling rent and bills, having fine-grained autonomy over hours is no small advantage. And in surveys, many gig workers do cite independence as a genuine benefit. But this flexibility masks volatility. Some weeks bring a high volume of requests and reasonable earnings, while others collapse into slowdowns with no warning. For graduates hoping their degrees would lead to predictable schedules and long-term security, the irregular pay feels like a betrayal of expectation. The absence of upward mobility intensifies that feeling. Once, entry-level roles were gateways to larger futures. Structured promotions, raises, and benefits accrued over years. In the gig economy, no such pathways exist. Driving for a rideshare company will not lead to management positions or increased earnings through loyalty. Deliveries today will be paid the same as deliveries tomorrow, and experience rarely translates into more opportunity. For graduates raised to think in terms of professional ladders, this cycle of stagnant work reduces ambition to a daily equation. How many hours must be logged to pay next month's bills? Stigma compounds the issue. Hiring managers often interpret resume periods filled with freelance or gig work as career gaps, undervaluing the discipline and persistence required to earn income in those roles. Graduates who turn to platforms out of necessity find themselves penalized when later trying to apply for traditional positions. The irony is stark. Educated workers are dismissed for lacking experience after years in classrooms and then discredited for earning a living in roles supposedly beneath their training. This cycle frustrates those who believed education would equal legitimacy in employers' eyes, only to discover that legitimacy remains conditional. Family comparisons sharpen these frustrations. Parents remember entering stable employment quickly after school, receiving healthcare and retirement saving programs as part of their compensation. By contrast, many of their children now manage tax obligations for gig earnings on their own, purchase costly insurance plans individually, or forego coverage entirely. Retirement savings stand out as another point of divergence. Many gig workers cannot contribute substantially because their income is fragmented and immediate expenses take priority. The generational comparison reveals how fragile the college-to-career pipeline has become, especially when education costs more than ever. Technology and social platforms have also reshaped the meaning of career pride. Instead of celebrating promotions into law offices or engineering firms, young adults often describe hitting weekly or monthly targets across different apps. Screenshots of gig earnings circulate online, offered as proof of discipline or hard work. But behind those posts lies a recalibration of what career accomplishment looks like. Goals have shifted from long-term stability to short-term benchmarks, from gradual growth to daily survival. Graduates are not boasting about careers. They are showing their adaptability in a system that left them with few conventional rewards to measure. For some, the short-term control over hours is valuable. Those needing to balance debt, caregiving, or unpredictable living costs appreciate being able to flex time in ways traditional jobs rarely allowed. But evidence shows why these same workers rarely see gig roles as sustainable. Without benefits, pensions, or progression, contract labor cannot support the same milestones previous generations expected in adulthood. Vacations, savings accounts, and eventual retirement investments remain distant because every dollar must be earned week to week without institutional support. The combination of control and instability defines the trade-off. Gig roles fill immediate needs while leaving long-term security out of reach. The broader implications extend beyond personal finances. An economy filled with educated gig workers reshapes housing markets, healthcare networks, and public programs. Workers with inconsistent income struggle to qualify for home loans, delaying ownership and reshaping demand in housing. Fewer consistently contribute to employer-backed benefits like retirement savings or insurance, increasing the strain on public safety nets designed to plug those losses. Student loans still demand regular payments, regardless of fluctuating earnings, creating a contradiction at the core of the system. The most stable obligation is repayment itself, not income. The cultural contrast reinforces this break. Graduates were promised in classrooms that their investments would buy stability and significant upward mobility. Instead, many navigate the gig landscape that rewards hustle without advancing it. Universities spoke of long-term careers, but most platforms offer only transactional exchanges. Every project or delivery resets the cycle rather than accumulating into professional growth. Debt persists upward while work remains flat, eroding the very rationale for borrowing in the first place. If the outcome of debt is freelancing without benefits and driving for app-based platforms, the justification collapses under its own weight. Still, it is important not to view the gig economy as an absolute negative or universal default. Instead, it functions as a fallback, and in many cases, the only viable immediate answer to obligations that young adults cannot defer. For some, it provides helpful flexibility and an income floor that traditional employers are unwilling to offer at the outset. But most see it as a stopgap rather than a path, a temporary means of weathering early years with debt before trying to pivot elsewhere. It highlights how the labor system no longer aligns with the promises made in college brochures, forcing graduates into mismatches they neither designed nor wished for. Because gig work is unstable, borrowers increasingly search for other ways to build security. Some turn toward faster, cheaper training programs or certifications that produce direct, measurable skills, hoping they will stand out to employers. Others look abroad with curiosity, noticing that this cycle of degree inflation and heavy reliance on debt is not global. Questions naturally arise. Is this dynamic unique to the United States, or have other societies found better ways to link education with outcomes? Those comparisons reveal that the instability confronting American graduates is only one model among many, and not the only possible design for connecting education and employment. Global lessons. Countries without degree inflation. Is the pattern of rising degree requirements and weakened job outcomes a universal reality, or is it the result of choices specific to the United States? Looking abroad reveals a very different picture. Many countries have structured education and employment pathways in ways that avoid forcing a four-year college degree onto jobs that don't require it. In those systems, young adults are able to move into stable employment without dragging years of debt behind them. What they show is that degree inflation is not an inevitable global trend, but one possible outcome of policy, culture, and funding priorities. Germany is frequently cited as a leading example of an alternative design. Instead of pressuring nearly all students into a general college pipeline, Germany's apprenticeship system gives high school students a choice to enter structured partnerships with employers. This model combines classroom learning with paid, hands-on training inside actual companies. Apprentices not only acquire industry-relevant instruction, but also earn wages during the process. At the end, they graduate with credentials recognized nationally and employers ready to hire them full-time. These programs extend far beyond trades. While automotive and manufacturing apprenticeships are well known, the system also covers finance, healthcare support, and information technology. The clear outcome is that young Germans step into roles with proven experience and avoid the paradox that plagues U.S. graduates: jobs labeled entry-level that still expect multiple years of prior work. Germany's apprenticeship system combines learning and work into a single track, reducing early unemployment and keeping credential expectations realistic. Nordic countries pursue a different, but equally effective approach. Across nations like Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, higher education is funded primarily by the public, meaning students face little to no tuition. Support systems are treated as investments into the stability of the workforce rather than as personal consumer choices. Here, the respect for vocational pathways is especially striking. Skilled trades such as carpentry, electrical work, and machining are viewed as respected professions rather than fallback options. These roles carry strong salary growth and benefits, and cultural narratives treat them as essential to the economy rather than second-class alternatives. Because both academic and vocational paths are seen as valuable, there is no incentive to inflate credentials unnecessarily. Retail, service, and support roles are filled without requiring unnecessary degrees, while advanced academic study remains concentrated in fields where it is genuinely demanded. Research backs up the benefits of these approaches. The Deloitte and World Economic Forum summary reports note that countries which combine strong vocational tracks with affordable public tertiary education see lower rates of degree inflation and smoother transitions into work. The OECD has highlighted that these systems reduce mismatches between graduate credentials and actual job requirements, which means young people begin earning stable wages faster. In simple terms, policy design creates education-to-employment pipelines that match real labor market needs, rather than flooding industries with over-credentialed but underprepared graduates. The contrast with the American system is sharp. In the U.S., vocational programs are politically and culturally stigmatized, often presented in high schools as less than compared to the four-year path. Families interpret deviation from college as risk, even when non-university apprenticeships or certifications align better with student interests or labor demand. This messaging funnels huge numbers into higher education, regardless of whether the degree is appropriate for their goals. Germany demonstrates how apprenticeships can thrive with employer partnerships and respectable compensation, but in the U.S., they remain small-scale and underpromoted. The gap is not one of national capability. It stems from perception, funding, and institutional choices. The long-term outcomes bear those differences out. German young adults frequently enter their mid-20s with established careers, paid work history, and training costs carried in part by employers, rather than financed through private loans. Nordic students who pursue higher education graduate with little or no debt, allowing them to accumulate savings, purchase homes, and start families well ahead of their American peers. By contrast, many U.S. graduates spend their mid-20s beginning repayment schedules rather than investing in future milestones, losing years of compounding financial security. While international peers settle into adulthood, American graduates are still untangling loans. On the level of national economies, these timelines matter. Graduates who secure viable wages by age 22 or 23 begin consuming, saving, and contributing taxes earlier. The U.S. often delays these timelines by nearly a decade for many graduates, while debt drains disposable income that would otherwise circulate into housing, retail, and long-term financial products. When higher education is heavily subsidized or fully funded, the payoff arrives in the form of broader household security and stronger consumer participation. The American design, by contrast, extracts future spending through loan repayment, weakening its own economic foundations in the process. The way companies engage with education also diverges. U.S. firms often expect universities to deliver finished workers, absolving themselves of training costs. Germany aligns industry and education closely, so that apprenticeships produce the skills companies know they will need. Nordic systems invest upfront to reduce crises later, recognizing that debt-burdened youth create downstream economic problems. Both models accept education as part of a shared responsibility rather than a purely private expense. That connection helps keep degree inflation contained, since the purpose of training is clearer in relation to future roles. Even cultural attitudes diverge dramatically. In the U.S., status attaches strongly to the possession of a degree, with vocational tracks suffering in prestige. Higher education institutions themselves reinforce that message through marketing campaigns that equate college attendance with legitimacy. By contrast, German and Nordic pathways give legitimacy to both university students and those pursuing skilled trades. The result is that fewer roles are artificially inflated by degree requirements because the credential itself carries balanced meaning rather than being treated as the single marker of worth. These differences do not mean alternative systems are flawless. Germany's apprenticeship model requires deep coordination between schools, businesses, and government. Nordic models depend on strong public commitments to funding education and taxpayer willingness to treat learning as a long-term social investment. Such approaches may be difficult to replicate without structural commitment. These alternatives are not without trade-offs. They require high levels of cooperation, careful regulation, and sustained funding. But their existence proves degree inflation is not automatic. It is produced by systems, and it can be limited by deliberate policy. The U.S. continues to operate within a framework that centers tuition revenue and positions universities as both the gatekeepers and financial intermediaries of opportunity. Other countries demonstrate clear options to design around these traps. Germany shows how apprenticeships tied directly to employers reduce the barrier of entry-level paradoxes. Nordic nations show how public funding and cultural respect for non-university tracks prevent the stigma that fuels degree overuse. Together, these models illustrate that different choices are possible. Whether or not the U.S. could adopt them wholesale is less important than recognizing the principle. Degree inflation is not destiny. International examples highlight that no economy is locked into the American model. The assumption that every role requires a bachelor's degree is distinctively U.S.-driven and sustained by its financing system and cultural pressures. Countries that built alternate paths reinforce the fact that education and work can be matched without overburdening households or inflating credentials across entire industries. Their experience creates a question for American students and policymakers alike. If other nations have proven that affordable, relevant, and respected pathways exist, what prevents the U.S. from considering them? This becomes even more relevant when looking at the ways young adults in the U.S. are already finding routes outside traditional college to build careers. With rising costs at home and limited reform in sight, many are turning toward shorter, skill-based alternatives that bypass the weight of four-year degrees and still lead to meaningful employment. Alternative paths that actually work. Why are some young adults today bypassing college and finding success through other routes? For decades, the dominant belief insisted that a four-year degree was the only reliable pathway to a stable future. Yet by 2025, evidence shows otherwise. Rising costs and inconsistent outcomes have weakened the promise of traditional degrees, pushing students towards skill-focused programs that emphasize direct links to employment instead of abstract theory. Apprenticeships, coding boot camps, trade schools, and industry-recognized certificates represent a growing set of alternatives. Unlike the traditional academic model, they emphasize practical competency and streamlined preparation, producing graduates who leave training with concrete tools, credentials, or portfolios aligned to specific employer expectations. The change is not just anecdotal. Surveys highlight a measurable shift in attitudes among younger generations. According to ASA research covered by K-12 Dive, interest in non-degree post-secondary options rose dramatically, from 12% in 2018 to 38% by 2024. That growth reflects more than cultural curiosity. It reveals that future cohorts are already questioning whether university is the default. Families and students increasingly see targeted training as a credible path to security. especially when weighed against the average student loan balance of nearly $38,000. Rising enthusiasm shows young adults are receptive to alternatives that shorten timelines, reduce debt, and offer clearer return on investment. Coding boot camps serve as one of the most visible examples of these pivot points. Typically running for 3 to 6 months, they train students intensively on programming languages, web development, and application design. What distinguishes them is not their lectures, but their outputs: functioning apps, interactive websites, and problem-solving exercises that mirror real-world demands. Employers in technology fields frequently say they value these products more than transcripts or lists of coursework. Unlike a bachelor's program that spends semesters on theoretical math or system history, boot camps place students directly into coding environments. Costs also remain significantly lower. Where a university degree may leave students servicing $500 or more in monthly repayments, short course tech programs often cost a fraction of that, and graduates enter interviews showing finished projects ready for review. Hiring data reflects this reality. Demonstrated skill increasingly outweighs the name of the institution listed on a resume. Trade schools represent another resilient channel, often overlooked in American culture, but routinely rewarded in labor markets. Electricians, plumbers, welders, automotive technicians, and machinists train for vocations that resist outsourcing and resist automation. Programs typically conclude within 2 years, carry far lower tuition costs, and graduate students with licenses directly tied to industry regulations. While recent college graduates may accept entry-level salaries that barely match the cost of living, skilled tradespeople often begin with higher hourly wages, overtime opportunities, and earlier financial independence. Because their training takes less time and requires fewer loans, many are able to save and invest at ages when degree holders are still deferring payments. This contrast underscores the advantage of trades. They link training tightly to function and compensate workers accordingly. Certificates have also surged as credible alternatives, particularly in digital fields. Platforms and corporations now offer training in cloud infrastructure, analytics tools, and project management platforms. Completion times range from weeks to months, with costs accessible in comparison to multi-year degrees. Their effectiveness lies in immediacy. While universities may take years to update their syllabi, certification providers refresh materials continually to match emerging technologies. For employers deciding between 2 applicants, a current industry certificate often outweighs general coursework from years prior. Certificates also add flexibility, letting workers layer on new competencies as industries evolve without returning to school for years at a time. Return on investment defines the most striking difference between these models and traditional higher education. A boot camp may cost well under $20,000, while the typical college graduate leaves with debt averaging around $38,000, sometimes much higher depending on the school and living expenses. Income share agreements attach repayment obligations to job placement, removing risk from the student's shoulders. Trade school students pay lower tuition and transition quickly into reliable jobs, often earning incomes that rival or exceed new university graduates with less financial baggage. Certificate programs, priced far below traditional tuition, offer an even clearer return by aligning directly with the skills hiring managers demand. The arithmetic is simple. Reduced upfront cost plus job alignment produces an outcome that competes strongly with a system weighed down by inflated tuition and inconsistent outcomes. Still, these programs vary in quality, which matters when expectations are high. Some certification and preparation models have been criticized for lack of depth. Research from the National Council on Teacher Quality notes that some alternative teacher certification tracks, for example, fail to provide adequate supervised practice before placing candidates in classrooms. The lesson is transferable. Not all non-degree programs deliver results equally. Choosing a poor quality option leaves students no better positioned than if they had pursued a traditional path. The most dependable alternatives share certain traits: strong employer partnerships, practical or clinical experience tied to coursework, and transparent reporting on placement outcomes. These elements separate viable opportunities from programs that simply sell hope. Employers themselves are reshaping how these choices are rewarded. In technology, hiring managers increasingly prioritize GitHub portfolios or live projects over diplomas. In business roles, micro-credentials in project management or financial analytics signal direct utility to a company's operations. In healthcare, programs training technologists and paramedics credential workers to step immediately into essential positions. Across industries, the pattern repeats. Proven skill and readiness to contribute carry more influence than the prestige of a college name. Recruiters see an immediate return when a candidate arrives job-ready, without requiring expensive, months-long onboarding. Cultural perceptions remain one of the last barriers to wider adoption. Many guidance counselors continue positioning four-year colleges as the only respectable benchmark of success, while parents who entered adulthood in a different era still equate degrees with legitimacy. That cultural weight slows adoption of apprenticeships or certification paths. Despite mounting evidence, they outperform college in employment outcomes and debt management. For families worried about appearances, non-degree pathways still feel uncertain, even though the numbers suggest they should be considered seriously. Students internalize the skepticism, often hesitating to pursue routes that may offer them the better outcome financially and professionally. Success rates further weaken the cultural stigma. Independent research shows high placement rates for bootcamp graduates in entry-level software development jobs. Trade schools demonstrate consistent employment outcomes because training is tied to industry standards and licensing processes that regulate access to work. Certificate completion correlates strongly with wage boosts and career pivots, particularly in technology and business operations. Where degree holders may languish underemployed for years, those who pursued alternatives often land role stability in months. The evidence undermines the belief that a degree guarantees upward mobility. Instead, results suggest access to focused, practice-based training offers faster, more reliable returns. These realizations also transform how students see their own education. Alternatives connect learning with results in ways degrees often fail to deliver. Workers who complete apprenticeships or coding courses observe a direct line between hours spent preparing and salaries earned afterward. They understand why they learn specific tasks and how those tasks translate to paychecks. Such alignment strengthens confidence while reducing frustration. By comparison, graduates paying debts for courses only loosely linked to their work feel disconnected from the purpose of their education. Still, alternatives are not a magic solution, and those considering them must evaluate carefully. Programs with limited oversight or unclear employer ties can produce disappointing outcomes. The strongest advice for young adults weighing their options is straightforward. Select models with published placement statistics, demonstrated employer partnerships, supervised hands-on practice, and credentials employers actually recognize. If you're evaluating alternatives, check placement rates, employer partners, and whether trainees graduate with a portfolio or license employers will value. The growing credibility of alternatives reframes the monopoly universities once held. Generations were told that higher education was non-negotiable, the one ticket to security. Yet in practice, skill-based programs, trades, and certifications have built pathways that often produce stronger financial foundations and more immediate employment than a traditional degree. Despite this, mainstream culture continues to elevate college as though it were the only serious choice. The result is a striking divergence between evidence and perception. Alternatives prove effective, but families remain hesitant to encourage them fully. And that hesitance does not arise naturally, it is maintained. For decades, universities have carefully cultivated the story that college equals success, reinforcing the image that anything else is second best. Brochures, advertisements, and campaign slogans package the college experience as both destiny and guarantee, a promise repeated until it becomes habit. Those glossy depictions are designed to overshadow conversations about debt, dropout rates, and employment struggles. It is this marketing machine, not just tradition, that sustains the belief in a four-year degree as the central dream, even as alternatives quietly prove otherwise. The false marketing of college promises. Picture the staged visuals shown at most universities: smiling graduates, tossing their caps, families celebrating, and glossy captions promising, "The future starts here." Slogans suggest a direct link between enrollment and lifelong prosperity. Yet the reality for many graduates looks starkly different. Instead of seamless entry into stable careers, countless students spend their first months after graduation sending out applications, fielding rejection emails, or working part-time jobs unrelated to their field of study. The The polished images rarely match the difficult experiences many face in 2025. This gap is not accidental. Colleges have refined a marketing formula that consistently emphasizes positive stories while sidestepping less flattering statistics. Promotional material highlights modern amenities, alumni success stories, and broad promises about career readiness. What is downplayed are the harder truths: dropout rates, average debt loads, or the percentage of graduates underemployed. Surveys support that skepticism among the public is growing. Research from Deloitte and Education Dynamics shows fewer than half of Americans now believe a degree is worth the cost if loans are required, underlining how marketing narratives and lived realities are beginning to diverge. Students and families looking for certainty often find themselves persuaded more by imagery than by verifiable data. Today, browsing university websites or attending campus tours highlights how deeply presentation is curated. Visitors are shown fitness centers, new residence halls, and landscaped quads meant to sell prestige and lifestyle. Career fairs and recruiters are displayed in videos as though every student will seamlessly connect with opportunity. But employment details, such as placement rates or average earnings, are often buried in small print reports instead of being placed front and center. This dynamic allows schools to cultivate confidence without engaging directly with the outcomes most families want to know. The more visible story is one of possibility. The less visible story is whether that possibility translates into results. Admissions play into this narrative heavily. Tour guides are trained to emphasize transformation, global opportunity, and thriving alumni networks. Parents are positioned as investors in their child's destiny, encouraged to frame tuition not as a cost, but as a stepping stone toward inevitable achievements. Recruiting offices expand marketing budgets to attract enrollees, often spending more on branding than on instructional support. Families often interpret this vision as credible because it is repeated so frequently across brochures, tours, and presentations. Yet the strongest guarantee universities can actually provide is enrollment itself, not the outcome awaiting after graduation. Some promotional material crosses into selective framing. Brochures highlight alumni earning six-figure salaries, but rarely show the range of typical earnings across an entire graduating cohort. Career placement numbers are sometimes counted by including part-time or temporary jobs unrelated to graduates' majors. Success stories are emphasized as the norm, when they are often exceptions. This selective approach doesn't necessarily present false information, but instead skews interpretation, allowing families to assume stability without seeing the broader, less polished picture. Families respond to these assurances with genuine belief. For many, sending a child to university has symbolic weight in addition to educational value. Attending a four-year school represents upward mobility, social legitimacy, and an affirmation that they made the right sacrifices. Recruiters reinforce this belief when questions about debt or cost arise, directing attention toward long-term benefits while smoothing over short-term repayment stress. Loan options are presented as routine, often normalized as if borrowing tens of thousands of dollars is simply part of the experience. In many cases, the structure of repayment stretching over decades is not fully explained until students are already committed. The result is an uneven burden of expectations. Graduates who discover the transition to work is slow or inconsistent frequently turn that disappointment inward, blaming themselves. Their institutions presented education as a near guarantee of employment. If doors don't open quickly, students often assume the fault is theirs rather than recognizing that the original promises were generalized and incomplete. The bigger issue is alignment. Institutional financial models prioritize enrollment, while families interpret enrollment as proof of eventual payoff. Those priorities don't always match. Marketing also helps sustain a broader cultural narrative. Universities sponsor media segments, work with corporate partners, and promote branding campaigns built around themes of personal transformation. Television spots, social campaigns, and influencer partnerships reinforce the view that enrollment almost automatically equals success. Guidance counselors, employers, and public officials often echo the same message, further entrenching the expectation. Even in a period where surveys show trust in higher education is declining, the continued flood of affirmations drowns out hesitation. The ideal of the degree remains louder than the warnings that it may not perform as promised. It's here that the question of accountability becomes sharpest. The current financial model places the responsibility on students and families to pay and borrow up front, while institutional revenue is secured regardless of long-term outcomes. This does not mean schools seek student failure, but it does mean incentives can become misaligned. Brochures must attract students, while employment statistics and debt burdens affect only after the institution is paid. For families, the important lesson is that glossy marketing cannot substitute for independent data. Outcomes should be evaluated through impartial sources, not promotional claims. Practical steps can make a difference. Before choosing or committing to any program, families should look for third-party verified statistics on job placement, median salaries by major, and debt-to-income ratios specific to the institution. Many reliable reports and databases now publish this information, though it is rarely emphasized by the schools themselves during recruitment. A straightforward question on a college tour, "Can you provide recent independent placement data for this major?" is often revealing. If the school hesitates or diverts the conversation, that reaction itself indicates how much reliance is being placed on narrative over measurable results. When touring or choosing a school, ask explicitly for third-party, recent placement stats and median earnings for your major. If the school resists, that's a red flag. Acknowledging this gap doesn't mean higher education has no value. Many students do graduate into solid careers, and certain majors still correlate strongly with stable, higher earnings. But the idea that every degree offers that same return is inaccurate. Understanding which degrees and which institutions generate consistent results is where careful scrutiny matters most. Families who approach the decision as they would a financial investment, demanding evidence, running comparisons, weighing long-term liabilities against prospective earnings, protect themselves better than those who buy into advertising imagery uncritically. By 2025, the stakes are clear. Students are not simply deciding what to learn, but also whether to commit substantial financial resources. Trust in higher education is declining because the gap between what is advertised and what is delivered has become too visible to ignore. Anecdotes of underemployed graduates, combined with rising national debt totals, are visible at every level of media and political discussion. That contrast makes uncritical belief in slogans harder to sustain, shifting more responsibility back onto students and their families to assess the value of what is being purchased. Universities will continue to advertise themselves as transformative, career-oriented, and prestigious. That will not change because enrollment drives their budgets. What can change is how families respond to that advertising. Whether they ask the harder questions, whether they insist on verifiable outcomes, and whether they prioritize affordability when making decisions. The promise that a degree automatically equals stability no longer holds. Evaluating the evidence, not the slogans, has become the most important step in choosing pathways that actually work. Recognizing this context also sets up the next challenge. If institutions market certainty but cannot guarantee outcomes, the logical concern for students and families is how to navigate the decision environment effectively. The question shifts from whether the promises are overstated to how individuals can protect themselves against risk in 2025, and which specific steps are available to reduce long-term liability. What students and families can actually do. If the promises no longer match reality, the practical question for students and families becomes how to navigate higher education without being pulled into long-term financial traps. The system may have limitations, but there are evidence-based strategies that reduce risk and position students to succeed despite the uncertainty. What matters now is not assuming college will protect you by default, but making decisions with the same discipline used for any major financial investment. The first step is to treat program selection as a return on investment calculation. Tuition has risen far faster than wages for several decades, and the average borrower leaves school with roughly $38,000 in student debt. Using ROI calculators or state-level workforce databases, families can compare program costs with projected starting salaries in their chosen fields and regions. A six-figure program in a low-paying discipline should raise immediate warning signs before enrollment. By contrast, degrees that consistently lead to strong incomes in healthcare, engineering, or certain technical areas present a safer equation. The simple act of asking, "What do graduates actually earn here, and how does that stack up against costs?" reframes the decision from emotion or prestige to long-term sustainability. A second protective measure is to take full advantage of the community college transfer route. Community colleges have grown in enrollment because they allow students to complete general education requirements for a fraction of the cost. 2 years at a local institution followed by transfer into a 4-year program with an articulation agreement yields the same diploma as those who spent all 4 years at the university. The difference is in savings. Families often cut tens of thousands of dollars from the total bill. The process is straightforward. Verify transfer agreements in advance, map your credits with an advisor, and know exactly how they carry over before you start. This option transforms what was once considered a backup into one of the smartest financial strategies available, combining affordability with access to a bachelor's degree. The third move is to build work-based learning into education as early as possible. Research from Inside Higher Ed and NACE shows that internships, apprenticeships, and co-op programs substantially increase students' chances of being hired after graduation. Employers consistently say they value candidates who have applied their skills outside of class. That means waiting until senior year to get experience is too late. Students should start with modest opportunities, part-time roles connected to their studies, internships at local firms, or apprenticeships offered through industry associations. Even 1 or 2 summers of practical work build a record that separates graduates from thousands of peers who only list class projects. The goal is not just resume lines, but actual proof of contribution, helping students enter job interviews with stories of real-world results, not just theoretical knowledge. A fourth strategy is to stack shorter certifications or portfolios alongside degree coursework. Studies from LinkedIn and PwC show that employers often pay wage premiums for workers with specific technical proficiencies, particularly in AI tools, data analysis, and cloud systems. Students who combine their majors with industry certifications or portfolios instantly stand out. The approach is practical. A communications student adds certifications in analytics platforms. A business major earns a credential in project management, or a computer science student builds a GitHub portfolio with working code. These layers show adaptability and immediate relevance, while signaling that the graduate is not reliant solely on abstract coursework. Employers reward that preparation, and it creates flexibility if job markets shift. Financial planning is as important as career planning. Surveys from Empower show many borrowers regret borrowing beyond tuition and essential living costs. Excess loans used for lifestyle spending, covering off-campus apartments, luxury expenses, or discretionary travel, compound into enduring burdens years later. Families should map financing with the rule that loans cover only tuition and core expenses, relying on scholarships, FAFSA grants, and part-time work wherever possible. Even modest reductions in borrowed amounts compound into tens of thousands in reduced repayment over a career. The lesson is simple. Every avoided dollar borrowed today is a dollar not repaid with interest tomorrow. Within these guardrails, students also must reconsider what counts as preparation during their years in school. Building employable skills cannot wait until after graduation. Side projects, volunteer roles, or gig-based applications of coursework matter. A marketing student runs local campaigns for small businesses. A design student freelances on platforms to build a portfolio. A biology student tutors or assists in labs, building technical experience alongside theory. These activities create both income and resume substance. By graduation, they provide a reservoir of applied proof at a time when employers are skeptical of hiring candidates with no experience. Parents play a role in shaping expectations, too. Prestige should not drive borrowing towards schools that do not improve job outcomes. Families need to be candid about whether a particular university's price tag is justified by the program's actual ROI. Public universities, in-state tuition, and schools with strong regional employer pipelines often offer outcomes equal to or better than their expensive private counterparts. By shifting the family discussion from status to practicality, parents help prevent students from taking on debt loads that prestige marketing cannot justify. At the same time, students must reframe their career planning. Relying entirely on a single diploma is no longer sufficient. Instead, blending affordable pathways, early applied work, and stackable credentials prepares them for resilience in unpredictable markets. Those who pursue these approaches not only reduce the financial risk of borrowing, but also improve their position with employers who value readiness more than pedigree. The transition is not about rejecting higher education altogether. It is about leveraging it strategically. Taken together, these 5 moves provide a defensible framework. Calculate ROI before investing. Use community college transfers to cut costs. Seek out work-based learning early. Stack certifications and portfolios on top of academic studies. And follow disciplined borrowing practices that prioritize affordability. Each of these addresses a specific weakness in the traditional model. Opaque costs, inflated tuition, lack of applied training, slow curriculum adaptation, and uncontrolled debt. By acting deliberately, families can cultivate pathways that secure the benefits of higher education while minimizing its central risks. This isn't theoretical, it echoes what more students are already doing. Enrollment patterns show rising interest in community college transfers, increased pursuit of certificates during undergrad, and heavy reliance on online tools to evaluate ROI. Employers confirm through surveys that they notice portfolios and internships immediately, often prioritizing them over the name on the diploma itself. And graduates who limited debt and layered practical experience consistently report smoother transitions into careers. What looks like narrow advice in practice functions as the decisive factor in avoiding the worst outcomes of the system. The value is not in escaping education, but in reshaping how it is pursued. Families who scrutinize programs financially, plan alternate routes, and supplement degrees with proof of skill shift the odds dramatically in their favor. The promise of security may not flow automatically from enrollment, but it is possible to create security with deliberate steps. In this environment, strategy matters more than tradition. If you've taken an alternative path or combined these strategies in a way that worked, share your experience in the comments. Your story could help other viewers weigh their choices more effectively. Adapting decisions at the front end will not fix the flaws of the system itself, but it will protect those entering it. And that leads to the larger truth. Education still holds value, but the traditional model no longer aligns with how the world works today. Degrees do continue to matter, but for many students the system built around them no longer guarantees the results it once did. The old narrative of automatic stability has weakened as costs climbed and skills-based hiring gained ground. The solutions are clearer than they seem. Careful ROI checks before enrolling, taking advantage of community college transfers, combining degrees with stackable skills-first pathways, and supporting broader policy changes like stronger apprenticeships. These steps don't erase the risks, but they reduce them and create safer routes into stable work. If you'd like a concise checklist for evaluating programs, ROI, placement, employer partners, and costs, comment checklist, and we'll pin a downloadable guide. And if this helped you think differently about college ROI, hit like and subscribe. We release practical guides about how to assess programs and pay for school without regret.